temp labor in a way isn't looked at as an industry.
What is that?
But it's a sector and it's an industry, and the industry is dealing in moving human beings. So instead of moving tomatoes, I move human beings around.
We live in a time when at the click of a mouse, goods from around the globe can arrive conveniently at our doorstep. Mega retailers like Walmart and Amazon have created a seamless and efficient system to get our goods to us quickly.
Amazon is a great example of what's possible. Last year, during the busiest day of the Christmas rush, customers around the world ordered more than 300 items from Amazon every second. And a lot of those traveled through this building.
What's not seen are the people who actually make this possible. Kept out of the public eye are temp workers, employed without benefits or securities. They play an integral role in keeping costs down and profits high. Many of these workers stay silent for fear of retribution, often having their livelihoods put in jeopardy if they speak out.
Hey bro, don't point that at me.
Wanting to know more about this integral yet invisible workforce, we traveled across the country, scouring warehouses, temp agencies, and temp towns in search of the people who make our world of same-day delivery possible. Over 70% of our consumer goods come into the US from overseas, unloaded at megaports like the Los Angeles Long Beach Maritime Terminal. Cargo ships carrying up to 12,000 containers dock here every day, and the goods they carry are unloaded and brought to warehouses to be unpacked and sorted. For the West Coast, an area an hour east of Los Angeles known as the Inland Empire, which was once filled with horse ranches and citrus groves, is now Warehouse Central. We're out in front of Schneider Logistics, which exclusively serves Walmart. They have over 2 million square feet of warehouse space here in the Inland Empire, and it actually spans 3 different cities. The Inland Empire has the largest concentration of warehouses in the world, and they serve other retailers too. Like GE, Nestle, Home Depot, and Kmart, to name a few. As retailers increase their online sales, it's at places like these that the essential tasks of sorting, labeling, and loading the stuff we buy happens. Online sales are growing at a dizzying pace as consumers increasingly look to the web to make purchases.
In the big retailers, for instance, we will probably see a lot of the behind-the-scenes workers actually being temps, and the conditions in these warehouses can be deplorable because we as American consumers now, myself included, expect our goods to be shipped to us just like that.
So what is it like working at a warehouse? What are the challenges temp workers face? So we're meeting Javier here, and we're going to hear from him what it was like working inside one of those massive warehouses. Javier's job was to unpack and repack containers at a warehouse where goods were often moved within the span of a few hours. What were you doing when you were at the warehouse?
Nosotros cuando llegábamos nos asignaban un tráiler en específico y de ese tráiler que nosotros teníamos que descargarlo a mano y teníamos que ir a ponerlo en diferentes tráilers que eran diferentes ciudades, destinos.
And were there any grievances that you had working in those conditions?
Habían ocasiones que personas se caían, te lastimabas, un mal movimiento. Bueno, ahorita el motivo por el que no estoy trabajando es porque ellos me despidieron. Entonces empecé a ser un blanco por medio de mis empleadores, por el motivo de que yo siempre alzaba la voz para defender, pues más que nada mi salud, pero también la de mis compañeros.
Javier's problems with accountability and safety are common for warehouse workers, and as the sector of employment expands, more and more people are subject to this kind of treatment.
Since the recession, temporary employment has increased, has added more jobs than any other industry in the United States. The earliest leader of the temporary help industry was Elmer Winter, who founded and was the CEO of Manpower Incorporated. Manpower is the largest temp industry from its founding in the late 40s through the 1990s. In the early years of the temporary help industry, they very much played on this idea that temp work was women's work. In the public arena, all of the images that they sold of temporary employment was of these kind of white, middle-class, very feminine women. One of the big things that changed, that kind of set the context for these cultural ideological changes, was really the rise in global competition. Basically, employers had a choice about how to respond. And one of those responses could have been to invest in workers. And instead, they took what policymakers call the low road and de-invested in workers, cut permanent employees, and temped out jobs.
Temps are increasingly part of a profitable business strategy of corporate giants. Last year, Walmart, the world's largest retailer, had its best shopping season yet, and Amazon continues to expand its warehouses and fulfillment centers. Even President Obama has gotten on board, because this type of labor is impossible to outsource.
Amazon is a great example of what's possible. Last year, during the busiest day of the Christmas rush, customers around the world ordered more than 300 items from Amazon every second. And a lot of those traveled through this building.
What Obama doesn't mention in his speech is how many of these industries are using temp labor to get back on their feet. In some distribution warehouses, temps outnumber direct hires.
So in general, the relationship between client company or the worksite company, a staffing agency, and a temp, scholars have called this a triangular employment relationship. So unlike the normal employment relationship, which just has two entities, a worker and an employer, this has three entities. It's supposed to be clear who is responsible, who is liable for the workers, but in reality, it's not always clear.
Once we learned that staffing agencies are as important to the logistical system as warehouses, we started to see them everywhere. We followed the railroad tracks to Chicago, the heart of the country's supply chain, which is also a hotbed of the temp staffing industry. We're at the Centerpoint Intermodal Hub, which is about an hour outside of Chicago, and it's the only place in the country where 6 major cargo rail lines intersect. Just like in California, people unpack, sort, and label the boxes of goods that come off these trains. Many of the same problems afflict these workers, and their grievances get lost in the ambiguous triangle between the worker, the warehouse, and the temp agency. In Chicago, there's yet another intermediary between the worker and anyone taking responsibility for safety. Labor brokers known as raiteros are often hired by agencies to do the dirty work of wrangling the workers to and from the warehouses. We're on the side of the road in the Little Village neighborhood of Chicago, which is the largest Hispanic population in the U.S. And we're waiting and trying to see raiteros, who are basically dudes who shake up temporary workers for the warehouses here. And they're kind of another middlemen in the whole system of getting temporary work in the U.S. Can I just talk to you for a second? I just want to talk to you for a second. So I talk to you for 1 second. 1 minute. So we tried to talk to a raitero who just picked up a worker in his van, but he just sped off. He didn't want to talk to us at all. The raiteros didn't want to talk, but they kept circling back because they had workers to pick up and money to make. We tried to speak with them again. Excuse me. Can I just talk to you for a second? With no luck. These guys are doing basically everything they can to avoid us. We just want to talk to them. They're still picking up the guys that they're taking to the warehouses, these temp workers, who then pay them for the ride. Since we had trouble getting raiteros to speak with us, we turned to members of the Chicago Workers Collaborative, who offered to take us off the main drag and further into the neighborhood to a parking lot full of raiteros.
I talked to a woman who got on and left, and I asked her where she was going, and she said to the shampoo place. Right. And I said, have you ever seen the company name? She doesn't know. Most workers don't know the name of the company, even if they've worked there for 5 or 6 years.
Raiteros used to be a lot more open and would talk to people about what they do. But the staffing agencies basically told them, if you keep talking about what our business is, we're going to stop using you. So that kind of intimidation trickles down, even from staffing agent to raitero to worker. As the first round of workers left at about 5 a.m., we decided to follow the next shift of early morning temp workers to the warehouses. We're on the side of the highway, about an hour outside of Chicago. Many of the warehouses that temp workers go to are located in this area. So we're hoping to catch one of the rateros on its way to the warehouse and follow it as it drops off workers. Yeah, there's one right there. It looks like there's like maybe 8, 10, potentially more people in there. Workers are at the mercy of rateros, who often charge each worker for their ride. In 2005, the Illinois state legislature made this form of coerced theft illegal, but it still happens all the time. We, like the temp workers being shuttled, didn't know where we'd end up. But our journey, which began before dawn, brought us to Great Kitchens, a frozen pizza manufacturer that sells pizzas to Walmart. Walmart has perfected logistics to a frightening science. But the way they do that is pitting subcontractors against each other to offer the cheapest contract. At the end of this great chain of logistics, the temp worker barely hangs on, their wages and prospects blunted by the force of cost cutting. So this morning, we weren't really able to talk to too many workers at the Shape Up, understandably because a lot of them were threatened with not getting a ride if they did talk to us. So instead, we're going to talk to Isaura, who lives in Cicero, and she's worked for a bunch of different temp agencies. Hello?
Hola.
Buenos días.
Buenos días, bienvenido.
Is there a reason that the rateros are in control of you getting to the warehouse?
Y siempre le dan prioridad a las oficinas las oficinas contratan al raitero y el raitero es el que busca a la gente. Entonces, siempre le dan preferencia a los raiteros.
How much do you have to pay a ratero to take you to the warehouse?
$8.
So you work 8 hours a day, and how much do you make every hour?
$8.25. Pues a uno le sale menos el cheque, porque de ahí nos descuentan lo del RAI.
Right.
El raitero no nos da nuestro cheque, hasta que no nos da, más bien no tocamos el cheque, ahí nos descuentan el RAI y lo que nos van a cobrar por el cheque, por cambiarlo.
So at the end of every week, I mean, how much money are you taking home?
280.
And so that would leave you with, a little bit more than $1,000 a month. Is that enough? Are you able to survive?
Trata uno de sobrevivir con eso. No se puede vivir con ese salario.
Are there any raiteros, are there guys that you trust?
En ninguno. Tener que ir a trabajar, se expone uno a todo. Vuelvo a decirte, a todo te expones.
Could you specifically tell us of an instance that you witnessed sexual harassment and what happened?
Una ocasión. Fue cuando inicié tenía como 2 o 3 meses que estaba trabajando con esa persona. Y pues me dijo que me esperara. Espérate, dice, deja ver cuánta gente llevo. Yo le dije, ¿qué pasó? ¿Si me va a llevar o no? Ya después me dijo, súbete. Y si no te quedas a trabajar, de allá para acá te invito y nos vamos a un hotel y sacas tu día. Y la gente a veces ni se imagina, ni tiene idea todo lo que uno pasa para recibir un producto en las manos. Cómo la gente sufre adentro. ¿Por qué lo permiten? Me imagino que va a haber mucho dinero de por medio, no sé. Pero las oficinas temporales no están ignorantes de todo el maltrato.
Are you originally from the U.S.?
México.
Do you regret coming to this country? It sounds like things are really hard.
A veces sí me arrepiento. Las fotos de mis papás. Mis 3 hijos. Que está en México. Y sí, me vine con muchas ilusiones a este país, pero pues aquí he recibido muy malos tratos.
For Isaura and many workers who aren't able to find legitimate employment, temp agencies are an imperfect necessity. Eking out a living means facing a battery of indignities. One of the ways that you can tell that temp work is such a large player in Chicago is the sheer number of temp agencies that line the streets. We went for a ride with Leone to learn more about how they operate.
The problem with temp labor is that it's set up to fail the workers at the bottom. You have the client company at the top that gives out contracts to the staffing agencies. In order to win that contract, staffing agencies have to underbid other staffing agencies. And by the time they win a bid, they have underbid other agencies, and the only way they can make even a small profit is by shorting workers' hours, charging them for rides, getting kickbacks from check cashing agencies. And temp labor in a way isn't looked at as an industry. Our argument is that it's a sector and it's an industry, and the industry is dealing in moving human beings. So instead of moving tomatoes, I move human beings around. It feels to us like in the last 10 or 15 years that the idea of using a temp agency is no longer something that client companies do a little here and a little there, but it really feels like it's the new way that people work.
How do you operate in what might essentially be kind of like a post-union landscape in a country that no longer produces many of the things that we consume?
The theory for us doesn't hold water because the vast majority of temp laborers in our experience are at the poverty level or below, and we're not going to rebuild the economy through part-time temp labor.
As we passed Ron's staffing, Leone mentioned Carlos Centenos, one of the most extreme examples of how a worker can fall through the cracks in this triangular employment.
And a few years ago, one of their workers was killed when at a shampoo factory, several hundred gallons of water mixed with acid fell on him, and he suffered third-degree burns.
And even though his skin was peeling from the acid, neither the warehouse nor the temp agency would call 911. He was finally taken to seek medical care in a co-worker's van.
It took 98 minutes to get from his place of work where the accident occurred till he got to the emergency room. And then he spent 3 weeks suffering in the hospital and he died. It's like a brave new world, right? War is peace, up is down, left is right, temp is perm.
If there is an injury on the job, the temp company might say, we're not at the work site. We don't control what work that temporary worker is doing. Meanwhile, the worksite employer will say, look, we are not the employer of this worker. How can we be held responsible for this injury?
While the conditions are harsh and the treatment borderline abusive, these jobs are still highly sought after. Even qualified workers like Reggie Hudson, a construction worker with 20 years of experience, struggle to find work. So Reggie, you're looking for temp work today?
Yes, I am.
Has it been a problem getting temp work?
Oh yeah, I've been having bad experience with temp agencies.
Yeah. Why do you think it is that you're not able to get temp work?
I feel that, I've been discriminated, because of me being a black American.
And so where are we going right now?
We're going to MVP right now.
Mm-hmm. Discrimination against employees is illegal. But with this triangular employment relationship between the worksite employer, the staffing agency, and the temp, it can be quite difficult to even know that discrimination is going on.
Well, I went inside and, they was saying they had work for people and that if you had steel toes, they'll send you out.
So you have steel-toed boots,
yeah,
and that's because you used to work construction, right?
Correct.
And how much were you making on union construction jobs, like per hour?
$36 an hour.
$36 an hour. How much are you gonna make if you get called in tomorrow?
I think she said start off with like $12. That's a big loss, but I'm willing to do that and supply for my family.
So what do you think the chances are of them saying to come back or to call at 4:30?
It's up for grabs.
There has been extensive research. We see that most temp agencies who locate in cities are locating in the segregated immigrant neighborhoods rather than the African American neighborhoods. So just by where they're setting up shop, they're seeking to recruit a particular kind of worker. But then when African Americans go to that staffing agency and put in their application, they may not get called back, unlike their immigrant or Latino counterparts.
The clustering of temp agencies in immigrant neighborhoods is most acute in New Brunswick, New Jersey, a small city outside of New York. Temp agencies target workers who live here, but send them to work an hour south, where most warehouses are located. Like people we met across the country, Margarita Lemus's day starts well before the sunrise.
Bueno, me levanto a las 4 para prepararme. a las 5, a 5:30, 6 tengo que salir a buscar el transporte. Yo tengo 6 años trabajando en el mismo lugar y nunca me aumentan el sueldo porque soy de agencia. Yo tengo dos hijos, también aparte de mis hijos están mis padres que dependen de mí. Yo me encargo de los gastos de ellos. Es difícil. La mayoría de las veces lo que casi siempre hago es trabajo los fines de semana. O si no, tengo que buscar trabajo extra después de uno, salgo de uno y voy a otro, para que pueda alcanzar para los dos, para mis hijos, mis gastos, mis padres. O sea, tengo que trabajar extra mucho tiempo. Voy a esperar el bus de la agencia que pasa aquí a 1,5 cuadras. Tengo que tomar el bus. Tengo otras opciones, pero si yo busco otras opciones, la agencia me saca del trabajo. Pues.
How much money do you make per hour?
$8.
And so is that enough to sort of make ends meet?
No es suficiente. Siempre hay que buscar otro trabajo los fines de semana para poder cubrir los gastos.
And do you think that's, unfair essentially, because you're working for these companies that make these things, but potentially you can't buy a lot of them?
Pues no es justo porque, para los años que tengo trabajando con ellos, no me pagan bien. Eso no es justo.
Is there a message that you would have to people who don't know that this is how the goods that they buy get to them? Is there people like you?
Bueno, que esa ropa que ellos compran, somos nosotros quienes las producimos para las tiendas, y lo que ellos no saben es de que en esos warehouses nos maltratan a los trabajadores, nos discriminan.
It is now a misconception that temporary work is actually temporary. We've definitely seen temps working for 10 years, 15 years at one employer every day as though he or she were a regular employee.
Retailers and warehouse companies are responsible for making profit. And while unpleasant, one very effective tool is relegating workers to permatemps.
How many people want a full-time position? Go out, do the type of work that gets noticed. You want to be a career temp? You want to make a little bit of money? Maybe save enough money to buy a TV, or buy a new phone, or put your phone back on for a few weeks, and then go disappear again? Okay, you can have that life, if that's what you want. But if you want to get on the carousel of opportunity, you got to show up. You got to be consistent. You got to be committed to doing this.
What kind of work do you sort of mediate?
So our clients come to us and they tell us we have a project to work on, or we need to staff up for the holiday season, whatever the need may be. My principal job is to make sure I provide them with quality workers. I have a corporate background, and I understand that the key is wherever you serve your product, it's got to taste the same, look the same, act the same.
Like there are other places that continuously sort of do the wrong way. And so what's the benefit of doing it the wrong way?
Well, I've heard some stories, I've heard some situations, and quite frankly, they sadden me. But I know in the industry there are people that choose to take shortcuts. They may employ people that are not legally able to work in this country. Now, I am not going to dispute the fact that there are companies out there in a triad relationship between undocumented worker, desperate worker as you referred to, which is probably the appropriate terminology, staffing agency taking full advantage of that situation, client taking advantage of that situation. This mega billion-dollar industry, it's one of the largest industries in the world.
Do you think it's a net good to have more temporary workers, just generally as a labor force?
If the alternative is to have less people employed, then I think it's an advantage to have more temporary workers.
Can you tell us how many people you put to work today?
Today we put out 427 people, and we've been averaging between 400 and 500. We're seeing changes into the hierarchy of the temp labor experience. For whatever reason, companies are choosing to create this other sector of employment, which is what I call steady, temporary some staffing agencies are just meat markets, process people, get them in, get them out. The bottom line is, we all have choices in this industry. Is my workforce a commodity? Are they no different than a package of batteries on the shelf? Or are they a person, a human resource that has the ability to not only endure, but to develop and grow?
So could you tell us roughly what percentage of temporary workers end up becoming direct hires from your agency?
Absolutely. We're tracking right now about 1 of every 50 people we send out gets converted over to a direct hire spot. Luck to you. That is swimming against the stream of the other activity, okay? That is offering opportunity. And hopefully, I'm building a trend that other people notice.
Still, the majority of the people sitting on those folding chairs aren't going to find that situation just because of situations that neither of us can change.
Companies are made up of different levels of work. They have their executive branch, they have their middle management, they have their rank and file, and they have what I call entry-level unskilled. There's always going to be a need for that group of individuals.
The Panama Canal is currently being expanded and will double in width, meaning even bigger ships stuffed with more of the things we buy will be able to make landfall on the East Coast at super maritime facilities like the Elizabeth Seaport. Not only are more goods coming into the country, but other industries like food are being roped into the same super warehousing system. Amazon is primed to do to the grocery store what it did to the bookstore. The online retailer has perfected logistics to such a degree that it can not only feed our desires, but can literally feed us. We're in central New Jersey, about an hour south of New York City, and behind me you'll see the future home of Amazon Fresh, a 1.2 million square foot warehouse that's going to be the hub of Amazon's new grocery delivering service. Amazon Fresh plans on offering same-day delivery, and what's crazy is that it takes places like this, giant warehouses staffed by temporary workers, to make it possible for me to order cereal online and get it delivered the same day. This whole area used to be farmland, and you'll still be getting your food from here, but instead of from farms, it'll be from warehouses. Even though the logistical industry is set to expand, that doesn't mean the conditions for workers will get any better. For permatemps, the prospect of joining the consumer economy that they support through their labor remains slim.
En las agencias llevo prácticamente 5 años. Pues sí he estado temporal, pero pues concretamente no es satisfactorio por la percepción. A raíz de que me quedé sin trabajo y era ya tiempo de nieve, desde las 5 de la mañana se escaseó mucho el trabajo. Desde las 5 de la mañana andaba yo de agencia en agencia, con agua y con nevada. Había días que no encontraba yo trabajo.
I mean, is there any kind of psychological toll that takes on you? Do you feel unstable? Is it tough to just sort of not know?
Sí, pues ese es la presión psicológica que hace el trabajo en agencias. La inseguridad de tener trabajo constante.
And how much do you make per hour? What is your hourly wage?
$8 la hora.
And if you work 40 hours a week, you make $320 a week?
En percepción, en bruto, sí son los 320, pero ya la percepción neta son 247. Desgraciadamente hemos notado que ahora ya es muy difícil encontrar trabajo por compañía, y por eso quedamos en manos de las agencias que llevamos la necesidad, y algunas veces ni siquiera tenemos la opción de protestar por un derecho.
So, I mean, this seems like a silly question in some ways, but why is it that you came to the country in the first place?
Bueno, ¿por qué llegué?
Sí.
Bueno, la palabra común, el sueño americano.
Is the treatment that you get, or the uncertainty that you have, even worse than you had expected it to be?
Pues, vea, yo sí tenía conocimiento de los riesgos, y no puedo decir que fue peor de lo que pensé. Yo estaba consciente de lo que yo no tenía conciencia, era del sistema para buscar un trabajo, sobre todo del social. Y si yo he sabido de eso, no vengo. ¿Quién deja a su familia por gusto? ¿Quién deja su casa por gusto? Nadie. Y siempre es la aspiración de todo trabajador. Aspiramos a una percepción. Yo he notado que hay gente americana que anda en agencias, pues, una oportunidad para trabajar. Por eso esa es la lucha de una reforma.
We have unprecedented levels of insecurity, of job insecurity in American workers today. This is not just for temps and not just for contract employees, but also for run-of-the-mill workers who feel highly insecure in their work lives, even if they have a so-called permanent job. And this is really because of this new cultural ideology about how little workers mean to employers.
The fact of the matter is, we do live in a capitalistic society. Nothing will change that structure. And that's good and it's bad. In one way, it might help a company's bottom line and be more productive, but it's also eliminating jobs. Now, where do all those people go for work? Okay? So there's no solution to that situation. The only solution to it, and the numbers are a few out of the group will move up.
Right.
That's just the way it is.
The economic growth of the US is pegged to the actions of the nation's consumers. As the technology for delivering our goods gets better and online sales continue to grow, warehouse work is becoming even more crucial. But due to the spreadsheet efficiency of sourcing essential labor to temp workers and the low margin squeeze throughout the supply chain, an entire subclass of people, many of whom are immigrants, are being pushed to the margins of poverty.
Lo siguen haciendo, lo hacen porque es nada más un negocio. Y es lo que nosotros a veces comentamos. Todo esto sale al público y si supiera todo lo que nosotros nos desempeñamos para hacer ese trabajo.
What's worse is this kind of employment could be a stepping stone to the middle class, but instead, the very people who make our consumer economy the most advanced it's ever been are trapped in a permanently temporary existence.
Vicente, aquí voy para 2 meses apenas, pero he estado en otros sitios más paupérrimos, más incongruentes, que pues sí siento que me da impresión que el temporal de frío lo voy a pasar acá.